I want us to read our first passage, and I want to maybe read it together. So if we could put that up. This is from Psalm 71, and so I want you to read it with me. I'll lead you, and think of the words as you read it. Since my youth, O God, you have taught me, and to this day I declare your marvelous deeds. Even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, O God, until I declare your power to the next generation, your might to all who are to come. You know, God has planned this life and love and wisdom, and he has planned, especially knowing him, that it should be passed along from one generation to the next. And just incidentally, it's not bad to be gray. Did you notice that? It's biblical. It's not bad. Look at this one. This is from Proverbs 20:29. A gray head is a crown of splendor. You should be bowing as you meet me this afternoon. That's right there in the Bible. It's not something I made up. But look at this. This is from another passage, Psalm 79:13. Look, it says this: from generation to generation, we will proclaim your praise. Now, think about this, because it goes right into what many of us are going to be facing this week. How do we declare God's praise to the next generation? Right? And that means within our families, the next generation. This Thursday, you'll probably be with your family. Maybe with some of you, your extended family. And that can be very, very stressful, right? You may have some whack jobs in your family. How many of you have some of those whack jobs? I see those hands, right? So it can be challenging. Now, maybe your family is a paragon of mental health, but I probably don't think so. We learn about God through the concept of a family. So I want to give you a story to illustrate this. Think of this as how it happened when God thought up the family, right? There was no families. And then one day, God is with his angels, and God says, I have an idea. I am going to create a family. A family. And then the angels say, well, what is it? God says, I'm really, really excited about this idea. Of course, I'm excited about all my ideas. One of the great things about being God is you never have a bad idea. This family is going to be the way that I connect people, just sort of kind of bind them together. And I was thinking about it, and the more I thought about it, I think it's going to work like this. Adult people, grown-up people, will take care of a little tiny stranger. And it'll work like this. And one of the angels says, well, are they going to get paid to do this? No. Actually, that little stranger is going to cost them a ton of money. And not only that, that little stranger won't even be able to talk at first. It'll just cry and scream. And they have to guess what the problem is. And it'll make them lose sleep. It will make messes everywhere all the time that they have to clean up. They'll be so utterly vulnerable that they're going to have to be with them like 24/7. And then when they turn around too, that little stranger will be able to say words like no and mine. And it will throw tantrums. And then I'm thinking about something as they get older, something called puberty. And I'm not real sure about this yet, but if things go the way I'm thinking, they'll have these little strange things called hormones that will make them crazy. Odd things will happen to their body. They'll get zits. Their voices will crack. And then they'll grow up. And just when they're mature and beautiful and interesting and able to contribute, they'll move away. That's the idea. What do you think? So the angels, they're sitting there kind of brushing their wings around, and so who's going to tell him? Well, I'm not going to tell him. You tell him. You're a cherubim. Lord, nobody is going to want to do that. Who's going to sign up for that? Why would they sign up for that? And here's where God gets really excited. That's the cool part. They won't even know why they're doing it. They'll just look at that little body, little hands, little feet, and they'll think that that baby is the most beautiful creature ever. But he'll look just like any other baby. All babies look like Winston Churchill. But they'll think this baby, that looks like a baby, doesn't it? On the sea and on the land. They'll think that baby is beautiful. And then one day that little stranger will just smile at them. And those grown-ups will think they've won the lottery. They won't have words to describe it. And one day that little stranger will say, Dada, Mama. But it'll say Dada first. And then one day those little arms and little hands will open up and they'll reach out and they'll wrap themselves around their neck. And it's going to feel for those grown-ups like for the first time, they understand why arms and hands were created. Now, why would God do this? See, I really believe it is a sneaky way of what grace is all about. See, grace is at the core of the universe. Grace is who God is. See, I sometimes, as evangelicals, we sometimes think about grace and that it's the forgiveness of sin. And of course it is for the forgiveness of sin, but it's way bigger than that. Grace refers to the gratuitous goodness, the generousness, the self-giving love of God. And that's why He created families. And children, the new generation, they will learn that they are loved and they are prized and that they belong way before they have ever done a single thing to earn it or deserve it. And grown-ups, the parents, the older generation, they will learn this, that when they give, they'll receive. They'll receive. And when they give the most, they receive the most. That giving is the best way to live. Most of you know I got married fairly late in life. And you get a little self-centered when you're 40 and you're the only person in the house. And when I had children, my wife, and then I had children, I learned that giving is the best. And then God says, they will learn now about my kingdom. That's going to be the beauty of this generation to the next generation. It will be grace expressed, grace incarnate. And then one day, God says, when I tell them, one day I will tell the entire human race, when they've had all these feelings and all these emotions, I will say to them, I'm your father. You're my daughter. You're my son. And they will get it. And they will just be undone by grace. It will hit them. And they will be wrecked by my love. They will be overwhelmed by my grace. That's what a family is. The Apostle Paul understood this a long time ago when he wrote to the church at Ephesus. Look at this. It says in Ephesians 3, for this reason I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. That's the connection. See, the whole idea of a family, the character, the name of family, is really an expression of the character, the love, the grace of God, and reflecting who God is. The family is God's idea. And it really is meant to express, to mirror, if you will, the ultimate spirituality, the ultimate truth of the universe. See, we've made the family too artificial with our sociology classes. The family is not some arbitrary cultural artifact that anthropologists can explore. The family is not just some biological mechanism that happens to be a handy way of passing our DNA to the next generation. It really is a divinely ordained idea. The family was created by God to be a reflection of His character, the manifestation of the kingdom. That's God's intent. But then there's always a problem here. Because you're thinking, Dwight, this sounds so good, but you don't know what I'm going to go through Thursday. Well, there was a fall. And the fall was not so good for the family. Remember, the first husband, the first wife, the first family, they disobeyed God. And they committed the first sin. And most of you know the story. It's recorded in Genesis 3. You don't need to turn to it. But you know the story. The man and the woman, they eat the forbidden food. And God comes on the scene and He says this. He says, have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat? And the man says, yes, I did it. It's my responsibility. It's my bad. I'm so sorry. You put all the heat, God, on me. Put the blame on me. No, he'd be nuts to say that, right? What did he really say? He said this. The woman that you put here with me, she gave me the fruit and I ate it, right? So this is the first family breakdown. And what happens? He blames. And by the way, you notice that he doesn't even call her by name. He doesn't say, Eve, my wife, Eve, the woman, That's what families do, right? When things go sour, when things go south, when things go wrong, we all of a sudden say things like, the woman, right? Come home from work. You know what your son did today? Or what's worse, try this. You're just like your mother. Those are fighting words. Your mother, your son, this woman. And by the way, God, she wasn't my idea, the woman you gave me. Now, imagine, I've always thought of this, imagine what happens later on. You ever been out with another couple and you said something and your wife just hated what you know she hated it, but you still had the protection of another couple there to keep it from anything blowing up? But then there's that drive home. Imagine what happened. God leaves, and Adam and Eve now, he just said this. It was this woman you gave me. And then God says, I'll be back. Hi. And then Eve maybe said something like this. Hey, Adam, I just really admire your courage in pointing out to God that it was my fault. Thanks for throwing me under the bus, that I gave you the fruit. Thanks so much for telling God all about that. I can tell you one fruit you're not getting later. Right? Don't write me. Blame, deceit, cowardice, denial, unresolved conflict, it all starts here. All the stuff that goes on, maybe Thanksgiving, begins here. And when you read through Genesis, really, it's just one story after another story of messed up families, deeply dysfunctional families. Right? Remember Cain and Abel, their children. How did that work out? Not very well for Abel. Then there's this murderer named Lamech who comes along and he introduces polygamy to the human race. And then there's this guy named Noah who gets drunk when his son sees him disrobe, and Noah pronounces a formal curse on his own son. And by the way, Noah is called the most righteous man in his generation, setting the bar a little low. And then there's Abraham. Abraham lies and says that his wife Sarah is really his sister because she's such a babe in the Lord that he's afraid that if a powerful man comes and sees how beautiful she is, that he'll want her, and if he finds out that she's married, then he could be gone. So he says to his wife, look, if somebody comes and wants you, you just say you're my sister. Yeah, that's the ticket. And so you remember that. And then you remember he has a child by Sarah's maid. Right? He doesn't believe God, so he has this child. And Abraham abandons the mother and the child. His son Isaac and his wife, they spent their whole lives playing favorites with their two sons, Jacob and Esau. Jacob, remember, with the help of his mother, he deceives his dad and cheats his brother out of his birthright. His brother ends up spending years trying to kill him. Jacob goes on to marry two women. He favors one of his sons, kind of passed down, the sickness. He favors a son named Joseph. And he favors him so much that his other brothers want to kill him. And they end up selling Joseph into slavery. They lie about it, and they cover it up for years and years and years. Think of all the Thanksgivings. And the father says, Man, I wish Joseph could be here. And they all went, yeah, it's a shame. I mean, here's the deal. If you read Genesis, it's like being on the Jerry Springer show. And that is really just the first book of the Bible. And the writer of Genesis, they don't try to cover it up because, you see, there has never been a golden age of the family. Because families, listen, you'll hear it Thursday, families are made up of those little sinners that grow up to be big sinners. That's what they are. One other thing. It is through those strange, dysfunctional, messed up, wackoed families that God is present and is working to keep the dream of redemption alive. It was these families that were laid open before us. And in all their humanity and in all their brokenness, we can take comfort. And I say that, especially if you're visiting, because that's what the church is as well, right? You may be thinking the opposite. The church is not a place for successful, together, healthy families to come together and congratulate each other on how well we're doing. It's a place for people in families broken and marred by sin to come and to confess their need for God, to do what only God can do. One time, a lady told me after she had attended Bedford church I pastored in Westchester County a few times. She came there a few times. And she said to me one time, Dwight, when I attend, I think to myself, I could never belong in a place like this. That's not for me. That's not my family. I mean, this place seems like a successful church with successful people, with successful families. And I could see how she felt that way. People might feel that way here this morning. You guys look pretty together. Most of you. You know, we did something a couple of months ago. It's kind of, I think, really a spiritual discipline to keep us real and on target. And I think especially in front of anybody here who happens to be visiting from out of town. I want to name some realities of family life that goes on, as honestly as Genesis did. And because we come to church and maybe we wear nice clothes or we drive nice cars and we have to break through the crust of appearance and superficiality and that idea that we got it all together. So I'm going to name some real problems and then ask you if you're a part of that family, that if you ever wrestled with any of those things. The problems that I name that have affected you or your parents or your children, the generations. Then at the end, I'm going to ask for you to stand up. Isn't that exciting? Aren't you glad that you should have went to that Lutheran church on the way here? All right, here we go. Think about it. If you've ever been a part of a family where there were children who wrestled with spiritual doubts, that maybe they think there is no God, or who wrestle with insecurity or peer rejection or low self-esteem. If you've ever been a part of a family where there is a drinking problem, maybe underage drinking, maybe experimentation with drugs, sexual activity outside of marriage, an unwanted pregnancy or an abortion, someone experiencing confusion or anguish, or maybe torment over their own sexual orientation. Ever been a part of a family where angry, bitter words get spoken on a regular basis? Ever been a part of a family where a dad or a mom or both feel like vocational failures, or maybe financial failures? Or kids who feel like failures because of maybe their grades. Or kids who get good grades, but they're plagued by anxiety or stress or depression. Or people who come to church, but they have a spouse who stays home and they wonder if they are really welcomed. Or a married couple who comes and they sit together and they look together, but they've not slept together for months. But nobody knows. Or people who have been through the awful pain of divorce. Or people who have never been married and wonder if they really belong here. Or families that have been rocked by sexual unfaithfulness or even emotional affairs, a betrayal. People that maybe carry a secret like sexual addiction or watching internet pornography, and the guilt eats at them from the inside, but nobody knows. We look fine on Sunday. Parents who feel like a failure because they have a son or a daughter who are so far from God, or so far from them. Or sons or daughters who feel like a disappointment because they have a parent that they could never please. No matter what they did, it was never enough. See, if we're going to be a family here, we really have to dethrone the idol of pride and image and appearance. So today, if you or your parents or your children have been hurt by any of these problems, I'm going to ask you now that you stand for just a moment. Stand. Now, just take a look. Right now, take a look around the room. I want you to know that I'm standing too. In fact, I'm standing higher than you. But I just want you to remember this picture when we gather together at other times when we look like we have our stuff together. You can be seated. The photograph was already taken up there. I want to say a word to everybody who is standing. If you have messed up, if you have fouled up, If you feel like you've set the record for brokenness, this is your place. You belong here. You belong here. I want to say welcome to your family. Remember, the family is God's idea. It's an expression of grace that gets passed down generation to generation. This horrible fall comes, this horrible moment when all violence and anger and deceit and betrayal and hurt and woundedness has flowed out of us. But then there's hope. It's why we will begin to celebrate Christmas. It's the person of Christ. You see, Jesus was God, and he came down to earth. He became human. And you know what else? He became a part of a family. He had parents, and he had siblings. And he had the struggles that you have. In fact, when he starts his ministry, his family is not cheering him on. They're looking at, remember, Mary pondered all those things with the wise men, the three kings, the shepherds, and all the deal, the angels. And they're looking at him hanging out with sinners. He is offending religious leaders, the respectable people, and they don't like this at all. It's not reflecting well on the family. So it says in Mark chapter 3, when his family heard about this, about what? Jesus' ministry, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he's out of his mind. See, you thought only people in your family said that about you. Look at that phrase. They want to take charge of him. Wonder how that played out. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they're concerned about his safety. Maybe they're concerned about the family's reputation. People kind of looking at them weird at ShopRite because of what Jesus is doing, even though they got a free turkey. So what are they doing? Take charge. They're doing what we say today, an intervention. They're going to intervene and pull him out of what he's doing. One time, people tell Jesus that his mother and his brothers are outside where he is teaching, and Jesus says this in Mark 3:33. Who are my brothers? Who are my mother? Who is my mother and my brothers? He asked. Then he looked at those seated, just like you're seated, in a circle around him, and he said, these are my brothers. This is my mother. Whoever does God's will is my family. Jesus is starting a new family. And that's what goes on in Acts chapter 2. It just kind of sprang. And there had never been anything like this before. And by the way, so you just don't get confused, there is one teaching, one command, one single command, which is at the root of everything we do on Sunday or Wednesday night or through the week. He said to his new family, John 15:12, my command is this: love one another as I have loved you. God teaches us about himself through the concept of family. And it starts with those little infants. Why do we love them so? They did nothing for it. They did nothing for us, and yet they belong so deeply. They are deeply loved. Then the fall, and then there's problems. But then Jesus tells this story. You remember, it resonates with us. Remember this story? There's a story of a son. Not a neighbor, but a son. A wayward son. And a loving father who waits for his return. In fact, Jesus teaches his disciples a new name for God. It's a family name. He says, Abba, Dada. I don't know what your family was like. I know what my family was like. Very, very broken, dysfunctional. One of the most poignant statements in all the Bible, I think in all of literature, comes from Psalm 27. Think about what this means. Some of you who know family pain. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. I want to tell you this morning. The Father is still looking for wayward children. He's still bringing in children. Oh, Dwight, you don't know what I've done. You don't know what I've done. You don't know what we have all done. Jesus is starting a new family, and it's here. It's us. Broken? Yes, absolutely. But oh, so deeply loved. Let's bow. Father, we thank you for your love for us. Thank you for your grace. Lord, thank you for letting us live in a community where grace abounds. Father, I think of this week, and many of us will see or feel or be the target of the brokenness that started way back. But Lord, remind us that right after Thanksgiving, there is Christmas. One who was sent to teach us that we have Abba, a new family. In this life, we're still broken, but we're oh so loved. And we pray this in Christ's name. Amen.